call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 65, the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates. Pursuant to Standing Order 81-4 and the order of reference adopted by the House on Wednesday, February 15, 2023, the committee is meeting to consider the main estimates 2023-2024. First, we welcome back for opening statement our Parliamentary Budget Officer, Mr. Giroux. They often talk about the legendary 12th man in football. You are the 12th man of OGGO, I say. I'll hand things over to you for 5 minutes, Mr. Giroux. Sorry, just before you start, colleagues, we may have bells for a vote at 4-ish. We just need UC that will continue until 5 minutes before the vote. Then we'll go up, we'll suspend and go up to vote. And we're fine with that. Wonderful. Mr. Giroux, the floor is yours for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I hope your reference to me being the 12th man also refers to a potential increase to my salary to equal that of a quarterback. Donc, bonjour, Monsieur le Président et Mesdames et Messieurs.
Good morning, Mr. President, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to appear before you today. We're pleased to be here to discuss our report on the government's expenditure plan and main estimates for 2023-24, which was published on March 3rd, 2023. With me today, I have our lead analyst on the report, Caitlin van der Wies, and Jill Giswold, the senior analyst who takes care of the main estimates. And the government's main estimates for 2023-24 outline $432.9 billion in budgetary spending authorities. Voted authorities, which require approval by Parliament, total $198.2 billion. Statutory authorities, for which the government already has Parliament's permission to spend, total $234.8 billion. Consistent with previous estimates, money transferred to other levels of government, individuals, and other organizations account for most of the planned spending, totaling $261.4 billion. This is followed by government operating and capital costs, with total $133.7 billion, and interest payments on the public debt, which total $37.8 billion.
Notable areas of spending in these main estimates include $76.6 billion for elderly benefits, which represents 1 in every $6, and $49.4 billion for the Canada Health Transfer, which represents 1 in every $9. Professional and special services spending, which includes contracts with external consultants, will be close to $20 billion, an increase of $2.2 billion or 13% from last year's main estimates. As Budget 2023 was tabled after the 2023-24 main estimates, these estimates do not reflect new budget measures. As such, the 2023-24 budgetary authorities will rise with these anticipated funding requests in the supplementary estimates. In accordance with the PBO's legislative mandate to provide impartial, independent analysis to help parliamentarians fulfill their constitutional role, which consists of holding government accountable, my office publishes analysis of the government's budget, as well as the main and supplementary estimates. On April 13, my office published our Budget 2023 Issues for Parliamentarians report. The report is designed to assist parliamentarians in their budgetary deliberations, highlighting key issues arising from the budget, which announced $69.7 billion in new spending on a gross basis. We would be pleased to respond to any questions you may have regarding our estimates analysis or other PBO work. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We'll start with Ms. Cusi for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Monsieur Giroux and team, for being here today. Monsieur Giroux, how has inflation impacted the spending on the main estimates, and in particular spending on the government's initiatives around housing?
That's an interesting question because inflation drives up some of the government spending, notably spending that is indexed to inflation. For example, old age security and the guaranteed income supplement, which is indexed to inflation. So from that perspective, government spending has increased due to inflation. However, if my memory serves me well, funding for housing, federal funding for housing, is voted on each year and is program funding that has to be approved by Parliament, and this is not automatically indexed. So when inflation rises, funding, if it remains stable, loses some of its real value as inflation erodes progressively some of the funding that's spent on housing.
You mentioned there's over $12 billion in revenue or spending decisions for which there are no specific details. What aspects of this spending do we know?
We don't know anything about that except that for some years it's a net expenditure, while in other years it's a reduction in expenditures. So we say that it's $12 billion in absolute value, but on a net basis it's closer to $800 million, consisting of subtractions and additions. But beyond the mathematical sum of these amounts, we know nothing about what's behind these numbers.
In your report, you mentioned that professional and special services spending will be close to $20 billion. Is this significantly more or less than normal?
We found in our analysis that the spending for these services has increased by a third over a number of years. So going back to, I think it's 2016, and I can be corrected on the exact timing, but it has gone up by a third, and it's increased by 13% year over year. So it's a significant increase.
And in your opinion, what is the primary driver in increased spending on management consulting?
When it comes specifically to management consulting, which has increased at a faster pace, even though it represents a small portion of it, it's difficult to pinpoint one factor because management services can take various forms. So it's very difficult to figure out exactly what's behind that, especially at a time when the public service has been growing. So it's services that normally you would expect the public service to be in a position to provide. It's understood that there's always a component of management services that will be necessary. For example, when the government is embarking on new programs and needs an outside impartial perspective on its own management. But for the growth to be what it is, it's a bit, it's not questionable, but it's surprising.
You mention in your report that the private sector forecast of nominal GDP is $29 billion, 0.9% lower per year. Why is the nominal GDP lower over 2023 to 2027 compared to your March 2023 outlook?
I think it amounts to differences in the perspectives on inflation. It's a combination of inflation perspectives that are different and also real growth that are slightly different. So in total, it doesn't make for a significant gap between the private sector and ourselves. It's mostly based on slightly different perspectives on the outlook for inflation as well as real growth.
Total budgetary authorities have decreased by $10.4 billion in the 2023-2024 main estimates, but you said that the apparent decrease in spending will likely be more than offset by the up to 3 supplementary estimates tabled over the course of the year. Can you elaborate on why that may be, and if you expect total spending for the year to increase from the year prior?
So we can look at the estimates themselves to get a picture of the government spending, but government appropriations are not tabled in one document. Usually the government tables its main estimates very early in the year, in fact, before the fiscal year starts, but it is supplemented by supplementary estimates as priorities become known and the budget gets tabled. So for that reason, looking just at the main estimates paints an incomplete picture of the overall spending of the government. A more accurate picture is provided in the government's budget, which includes most of the elements that the government plans on spending. So that's why we indicate that government spending, as outlined in the main estimates, is incomplete because the main estimates were tabled before the budget was tabled. So we know full well that there's at least $9 billion of new spending that was announced in the budget but is not in the main estimates. So there will be at least that much new spending that is not in the mains that will have to be included in supplementary estimates A, B, or even C.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Jouari, please.
Thank you, Chair. And once again, welcome, Mr. Giroux and your team. I consider you and the team as the combined 12 member of this committee. And thank you for always, you and your team, being available on a very, very short notice when our office called and asked for clarification, whether it's a review of a report that you put out or we have a question that we want to clarify. We've seen great response, and thank you once again on that. Thank you for your report. Under Section 2, under spending, especially for the elderly benefit, you've indicated that money for elderly benefit is the single largest area of federal spending. And you further broke it down under the 3 different programs, and you highlighted where these funds are going. You specifically talk about the increase during the 2023-2024 budget and then projected budget by 27-28. And you also highlighted some of the policy decision. Can you elaborate on those 3 points?
So we expect spending on old age security and the guaranteed income supplement to rise significantly over the next couple of years due to 2 main factors. Demographics, so as the population of those aged 65 and over grows, that increases the population eligible for these 2 programs, and also inflation, obviously. But there's a third factor that contributes to the growth in expenditures for old age security and the guaranteed income supplement, and that's the top-up for those aged 75 and over that the government recently introduced. So these 3 factors are driving growth in old age expenditures.
Thank you. So to be clarified, that's this round we are asked the elderly benefit is increased by $7.5 billion and 11%, and it's going to go to 76 to the tune of $76.7 billion. And then you're projecting that by 27-28, it will go to about $93.8 billion. And you highlighted the fact that the 10% top-up is playing a major role. So thank you on that one. I'd like to go to the expenditure on the consulting side. Under I think part 2.3, professional and special services, on page 8, you're specifically talking about while management consulting only accounts for a small portion, 5% of the overall spending on professional and special services. So it has shown consistent growth. So the 5% of the overall spend, and is that 5% of the $20 billion, or is it? Can you expand on that one, please?
Sure. So spending on management and consulting services amounts to about slightly over $800 million, so between $800 and $900 million, which is roughly 5% of the $20 billion that is spent on professional and special services. So that's why we say it's a small portion of the overall expenditures on professional and special services.
So roughly about $800 million, 5% of the $20 billion. Can you in buckets tell us where that $20 billion is going, and in your point of view, are those investments well spent?
So I can talk about professional and special services. So these include health and welfare services, which is spending in good part to provide health services to First Nation communities and remote communities. It also includes other types of spending such as engineering services, financial management, economic development. So it includes a wide variety of different types of services. Whether it provides good value for money, I think, is up to each minister to answer to that question, because we have not looked at what types of services and whether these services are provided at the best cost possible or whether the services are of very good quality. I assume that the departments that are providing these contracts do some type of due diligence to ensure they get good value for money, but it's not my role to provide that type of assessment.
Thank you very much. I got about a minute, and I want to actually go back to the second pillar of the budget that was put out, and it had to do with the healthcare. Your report, you talked about the total amount of, I think, 198 million and the 49.4 billion. Specifically, that I want to talk about the $25 billion over 10 years that has been earmarked for bilateral agreement. Were you able to get some detail around how those $25 billion will be spent?
It's not something that we have studied yet because the agreements are relatively recent and they seem to be straight transfers to provinces and territories. So no, I haven't looked at exactly how these amounts will be spent by provinces and territories.
Once again, thank you.
Well done, sir. Mrs. Vinola, please, for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci à vous d'être.
Thank you for you coming here yet again today. When I look at 1.3 variations on the budget distribution, I see that the transfer payments have decreased by about 1%, and also for the operating expenses and capital expenses. Do we have to make a link of the decrease in transfer payments to fiscal disequilibrium? Are the figures the result that in the pandemic there were more transfers to Quebec and Canadian provinces? Is it a combination of both? I'd like to know why transfer payments decreased. It's something that can be explained in large part by the post-COVID transition. So the figures from one year to another one are biased because there were still expenses related to COVID, which explains the very slight decrease of transfer payments of 1 year from 1 year to another. I'll go with table 2.2, page 7. I see that in total dollars, the increase of transfers is the same from 2011 to 2028. But if I look at the annual growth rate, I see that on the dots for dotted lines for the next years, it goes even below what we saw from 2011 to 2017. What explains that phenomenon? That can be explained by the GDP growth, which will be a bit slower than what we experienced over preceding years. The Canadian health transfers has a growth that's related to the nominal growth of GDP. So when there's a high nominal GDP increase, and there's economic growth and inflation, the growth is solid. What we saw for several of the previous years, there were one-time amounts that were spent during COVID. So it means that there's a peak in the table at 2.2, followed by a rather pronounced decrease. And in future, the Canadian health transfers will grow at a minimal guaranteed rate of 5% rather than 2.3%. But economic growth and inflation should not go past the baseline. So that's why we're anticipating a growth of 5% for the next few years in the Canada Health Transfer. 1 year will be close to 6% because of economic growth, which should push it a bit higher than 5%. Given the aging of the population and the increase in the population, are there transfers in the at the minimal rate that you mentioned, a little more than 5%? It's enough to deal with our needs and see a lack of growth over past years. Well, it's hard to see what if it's sufficient or not. Every year we table an analysis of these aging the population, and we will be updating these analyses in June to take into account post-pandemic period and also new health transfers. And I hope that that will answer your question, at least in part. I'm looking forward to reading it. The last one was very interesting. We received this year the main estimates document before the budget was tabled in the House. We expect that the budget tabled in the House has some announcements that were probably not listed in the document I have in hand. Do you have an approximation of the total amount of what does not appear in this budget and was in the announcement several weeks ago? Yes, we think there are about $9 billion, a bit more than $9 billion of expenses for the current year, which are in the budget but are not in the main estimates. So there's already a difference of $9 billion because of the budget announcements, which did not make it into the main estimates. So they would probably be in the supplementary expenses. Yes, it should be there unless the government decides to abandon some measures. So the government is negotiating with its employees currently. I imagine that the agreements that were signed recently are not planned in the main estimates. I don't think so, but it's always possible that there's a certain degree of flexibility that is provided by lower expenses in some sectors that will serve to fund the retroactive salary increases that will be given to employees who have reached agreements if they're ratified by the union members, of course. But to my knowledge, there is no specific rubric in the main estimates to that effect. Thank you very much for being here.
The minister has highlighted, both in the House and in the budget, that they're reducing roughly 15% of management consulting fees in 2023-24. Do you see that government moving towards that?
There's no evidence of that in the main estimates. However, the main estimates, as the supplementary estimates, are up to amounts. So it gives authority to ministers and the government to spend up to these amounts. They don't have the obligation to spend all of them, but I haven't seen that reduction materialized in the mains, in good part because the mains were tabled before the budget made that announcement. I haven't seen that.
Given the overall amount of money that's being spent on outsourcing and this unbelievable amount of growth in outsourcing, is 15%, where does that bring us back to? Does that bring us back to what would be spent back in 2021 or 2022? I mean, this isn't substantial given the increase, is it?
I think, and I'm looking at Jill and Caitlin if they know, I think that would bring us back 1 or 2 years ago. It wouldn't bring us back 5 or 6 or 7 years ago.
Right. What would it take to bring us back to 5 or 6 or 7 years ago?
Probably a 30-35% reduction.
Okay. Thank you for that. One thing, we talked about the benefits and the cost of benefits for the OAS, especially with the increase for those that are over 75. What would it cost to bring in everybody over 65 to get the same benefit of those over 75? Have you examined that?
I haven't calculated that, but it would probably be a bit more expensive given the demographic composition of the Canadian population. So we estimate that the 10% top-up for those 75 and older is estimated to cost $2.6 billion in the current year. So it would probably be at least that.
What would a 1% corporate tax increase generate?
Off the top of my head, I don't have that answer.
Okay, you haven't looked at that. Okay. And I think you've done some reports already on tax havens and leakages to the Canadian economy.
Yeah, we have done a couple of reports on tax enforcement, the tax gap. So there's quite a bit of reports on our website on all these issues.
I mean, a corporate tax increase, even 1% would cover the gap between 65 and 75 is my understanding. And so I think government's choosing corporate tax breaks versus helping people, seniors, afford the cost of living. So that would be my big concern around that. Now, we had Michael Warnick here, and he testified about the importance of spending money on training and the cuts under the Conservative government around training and leadership training as well. Do you agree that investing in public service training would certainly help reduce the amounts of consultants, on highly paid consultants?
It probably could reduce the amount of consulting that is necessary. But I think just hiring the right types of public servants would probably also contribute to reducing the need for consultants. So it's not just a matter of training. I think it's that, but also a matter of recruiting the right skill sets.
We've seen, government departments constantly lap spending. I mean, we saw Veterans Affairs under the Harper government leave $1.1 billion of unspent money. We had a motion in the House to stop lap spending on Veterans Affairs back in 2018. My motion, actually, in the House, and it was unanimously supported. But we're still seeing it. Can you speak about some of the worst departments in terms of lap spending and maybe why they're unable to spend the funds that have been allocated and promised?
So lapse spending occurs when a department does not spend all of its allocated spending, so the spending that Parliament has authorized it to spend, and it can occur for a variety of reasons. It can be due to delayed proposals or delay in acquisition. Off the top of my head, usually the departments that have the biggest lapses are also those with the biggest budgets. The Department of National Defense comes up usually at the top of the list because it has major procurement projects, which can be delayed for a variety of reasons. But I don't remember off the top of my head who's number two, but usually the bigger the department, more likely they are to be in the top 5 league of departments that lapse.
So there's no surprises, none that kind of popped out, when you're looking at them that, had substantial lapse spending that were failing to deliver on their promises?
We don't have lapses for the year that ended March 31st. We'll have the lapses only in the fall when we get the public accounts or when we get closer to the public accounts. So the only data we have are lapses for the year that ended in March 2022, so over a year ago.
Back to the seniors and the OAS, do you see that being sufficient, the increase for low-income seniors to manage inflation and the cost of living?
Just a brief answer, please.
That's a very delicate answer. It's highly subjective, so it's a policy decision, which I can't really address.
Thanks, Mr. Johns. Before we start the next round, I'm told that there will not be a vote that will disturb our committee. Maybe later, but we'll be done by then. Mr. Barrett for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to the witnesses for appearing here today. At the beginning of April, it was reported that over the last 7 years, the Liberal government increased the cost to run government by $151 billion per year, adjusted for inflation. What will the impact be of this increase on the inflationary pressures faced by Canadians?
So the Bank of Canada indicated in its monetary policy report a couple of weeks ago, in fact, that government spending, and not just the federal government, but also provincial government spending in general, and given the fiscal policy stance, contributes to inflation. So the funding or the spending that you mentioned being part of government spending, obviously the cost of government operations, that also contributes to sustaining inflation. It contributes to a small extent because it's not like major spending, although we can debate what major is in the context of monetary policy and fiscal policy, but it does contribute to sustaining inflation.
In the last 3 years alone, the tax burden imposed on Canadians by the federal government has increased by approximately $3,000 per person per year, which is about 5% of the average person's annual income, and that's on top of inflation. Would you say that Canadians are getting good value or their money's worth from the government?
That's a debatable question. Some would say the people are getting tremendous value for their money. Others would say not. So it depends on the individual profile. But what I can speak to is performance targets that departments themselves choose and report on. And we find that generally speaking, there's about half of government performance targets that are met, with the others either having no deadline to meet the targets or being not met entirely. So I think that's probably as good an answer as I can give to your question.
The government has proposed a confiscation for compensation proposal. They call it a gun buyback. I'm wondering if you can speak to the costs, the expected costs of that program.
So it's something that we considered, I think, a year ago when we knew some parameters back when, and it's before all the recent changes were announced. And at the time, we estimated that the cost of the gun buyback would be several $100 million, and you'll have to forgive me for not remembering the exact amount, but we estimated, I think, $800 million for the gun buyback program, but I may be wrong. I'll have to provide you with a more accurate response in writing.
So you'd be able to update the analysis that you completed before and provide it to the committee?
It's probably something we could do if the committee wishes us to do so.
Okay. I'm not sure if we need concurrence for that to happen, Chair.
I think we just ask if we can update it.
Okay.
If
Will
the
of the
committee
committee,
wishes to do so and passes a motion, we'll be happy to do that.
There should be the will of the committee for that.
Okay, that's great. How much time do I have remaining, Chair?
1 minute, please.
Well, we've heard that the government's fiscal policies are making the job of the Bank of Canada to tame inflation harder. Is that tension that's being created between the government and the Bank of Canada's objective of getting inflation under control something that needs to be addressed in terms of policy or just in terms of the budget that the government puts forward?
Well, when there's a tension like that, it's up to the bank and the government to discuss to the extent possible, but there's not that much to discuss when the government decides its fiscal policy and gives a mandate to the Bank of Canada. So, as you pointed out, when government's fiscal policy is sustaining inflation, if not worse, then it makes the job of the bank slightly more difficult, and it forces the Bank of Canada to increase interest rates slightly more than it would otherwise have to do. It's the federal government, but also provincial governments that are contributing to that by increasing their expenditures. And as you pointed out, it can lead to tensions between the fiscal policy and the monetary policy, and the way to solve that is by having slightly higher than expected or than otherwise needed interest rates.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Thompson, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome back to committee. I'd like to go back to the health transfer and specifically speak about dental care. And certainly, we well know that dental care is oral care, it's health care. And certainly, there are very strong evidence-based models that demonstrate the health outcomes that follow. Will you be conducting a cost analysis on the funds that are being spent on dental care and their relationship then or the outcomes in healthcare?
So we have asked the government for information, detailed information on parameters of the dental care program that was announced in the budget. We have been told that the details that we need are not yet available. In fact, we've been told that these are cabinet confidences. So we have not been able to cost the dental program that was announced in the budget yet. I'm hopeful this will change. As to whether this will lead to savings in other areas of healthcare, it is not yet part of our analysis because it would be quite difficult to assess the downstream impacts of this program on other healthcare expenditures.
Thank you. From someone who helped build a primary health care team, very vulnerable person, street level, and put in dental care. I'm very excited about the data piece attached to the health transfers, and I think that data system, that's a national system, will go a long way in being able to provide that outcome. But switching now to carbon pricing, I'd like to take the opportunity, if I could, to clear the air. Is it true that all revenues gained from carbon pricing is redistributed as rebates to those under the federal carbon pricing system?
My understanding is that all the revenues for the carbon levy, the vast majority at the very least, if not the totality, are to be redistributed to households in the provinces in which they are raised.
Thank you. And still with carbon pricing, why did your office not use a comparison in the comments on carbon pricing? And when we know that there are comparative models out there that really that very clearly speak about the cost of climate action, and I use an example in my province of Newfoundland and Labrador, without the impacts in the Atlantic provinces on Hurricane Fiona and the real cost now on the southwest coast. So could you speak to why that comparative model wasn't, or that price, on the actual price of climate action wasn't included?
So we did attempt to cost the impacts of climate change on the Canadian economy between now and 2100. So we have estimated the most likely, or we have, the most likely, our best attempt at estimating the impacts of climate change on the Canadian economy. What we have not done is compared a world where nobody acts on climate change. So the so-called benefit of acting on climate change, because this is a very difficult counterfactual to find. So we have estimated the cost of the carbon tax, or how much households will receive, how much it will cost, the cost of climate change, and so on. But we have not found a credible, reliable model that would allow us to tangibly cost the benefits of acting on climate change. And even if we did, we'd have to assume that in that counterfactual, nobody does anything on climate change, which is not very credible. So that's the difficulty of trying to estimate the benefit of implementing a carbon levy or a carbon tax and other actions to fight climate change.
Thank you. Debt servicing costs, if I could switch to that for a moment. What measures are government taking to bring down the public debt?
Right now, I don't see measures to bring down government debt. what we see is deficits for the foreseeable future. So these deficits will continue to increase the federal debt. What we are seeing, though, is a commitment by the government to reduce the debt to GDP ratio. So the debt in absolute terms will continue or is expected to continue to increase. But compared to the size, the overall size of the economy, it's expected to represent a slightly diminishing share of the national economy.
When do you expect?
I'm afraid that's our time.
Thank you.
Mrs. Vinola for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I just have one question. In her speech, the finance minister announced that the expenses for consultation, professional services, and for travel would be decreased by about 15%. What amount will be saved by this announcement? I believe that the government is aiming for savings of about $3 billion by decreasing travel and decreasing expenses for consultants. But Caitlin might be able to correct me because I'm not sure that I have the exact amounts. Thank you for your question. I'm going to be continuing in English.
In dollar amounts, it's the government has indicated its plan on reducing consulting professional special services and travel by $500 million this fiscal year and $1.7 billion ongoing. So to give you some information, in 21-22, management consulting was $800 million.
OK. Donc, sur un budget de...
So on a budget of more than $430 billion, we can see that it's not very large. So announcing these cuts, is that more a political decision than a logical type of decision? Well, we can agree about consultants, but was there some waste there, or was it really popular pressure? People are unhappy, so we're going to go where it's most visible, but we wouldn't touch anything else? That's a good question. I think the minister would be in a better position to answer the question, to tell you why that was identified. But I know that happened right after a controversy on a well-known consultant company. So the travel expenses is an easy target to decrease these expenses. If all the exercises of travel expenses had put in place, I don't think the Ottawa airport would still be in existence.
We'll have some more rounds for you, though. Mr. Johns, please.
Thanks. So it's my understanding that 1% corporate tax increase back in 2015 would have generated $2.6 billion. So enough to cover the gap for the over 65 to 75 that aren't getting the 10% increase in OAS. Is it possible for you to formally respond to this committee on what it would cost between 65 and 75 to increase the OAS by 10%, and also what the corporate tax rate 1% increase would be in today's dollars?
If the committee wishes me to do so, me and my office, through a motion, we'd be happy to do that.
Colleagues, are we fine with that? I think so. Consider it so, Mr. Giroux. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you to the committee members. Have you looked at and done an analysis, like the UK has done an excess profit tax on oil and gas of 25%? Have you considered looking at what that would generate for oil and gas, the big grocery stores, and the big banks?
We have looked at the cost, or are in the process of looking at the revenue-generating measure of an additional tax on big banks. I think we've already done that analysis, which was announced in the budget. To be honest, Mr. Johns, we've done so many reports on various topics that I sometimes lose track of exactly what we have done and what we are still working on. I don't think we have done that for the profits of oil and gas companies, but I may be wrong. Sometimes I'm asked questions, have you done this and that? And we have, and I forgot about it. So, but I can I can get back to you on that specific question and send you the links if we have done that analysis.
I think all of us are dealing with, our healthcare system, the stresses on it. We certainly know mental health and the toxic drug crisis are adding a whole element to it. It's backing up our healthcare system. Patients aren't getting the care they need. Have you looked at the cost of not investing in mental health care and in the toxic drug crisis versus, the preventative measures of investing in mental health and the toxic drug crisis? And I cite the Blue Ribbon Report on Crime that British Columbia developed in 2012, that cited every dollar spent saves $12 to the system.
Unfortunately, it's not something that we have looked at. It's very difficult for us economists and accountants to look at the costs of not doing something or the additional costs that are incurred by inaction in some areas. It's possible, but we have not done that analysis yet.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Block, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I join my colleagues in welcoming you back to our committee to provide us with more explanations on your report on the mains. I know that the mains were tabled before the budget and that they don't include any new spending, as you mentioned in the figures that we're looking at. But I just want to note for you and my colleagues here today that Canadians back home in Saskatchewan are absolutely blown away by a figure of $1.22 trillion in projected federal debt. They are gravely concerned by the $43.9 billion, which is the amount projected to be the cost of servicing Canada's national debt this fiscal year. And as has already been noted, the debt servicing costs have increased by 60% since last year. With the plan by this government to continue running deficits, have you done any estimates or analysis on how much the debt servicing costs will grow under the government spending plans over the next few years?
So yes, to answer your question, we have released an economic and fiscal outlook in March, just before the budget. And in that economic and fiscal outlook, we estimate that the debt servicing costs that was before the budget will increase to about $46 billion by 27-28. And it depends, it's highly contingent on interest rates, the movement in interest rates, obviously, and on the fiscal path. So because that was before the budget and the budget included net new spending, the real figure right now, if we were to update that, would probably be slightly higher than $46 billion in public debt charges by 2027-28.
Thank you very much. In your report on the mains dated March 3rd, 2023, on page 2, you made the following observation, and I think you made this observation when we discussed sub-Cs, but I'm just going to quote it. The government chose not to table the corresponding departmental plans at the same time as the main estimates. You also noted that these plans provide important details regarding what the government expects to achieve with the money requested from Parliament, and that our ability as parliamentarians to meaningfully scrutinize the government's spending requests in the mains is undermined by the absence of the government's plans. And so I guess what I'm wanting to know from you is how we can improve the process when it comes to the tabling of departmental plans, reports and plans, and whether or not there should be some sort of penalty for departments who don't table their plans in time for the estimate process.
So I like your idea of penalties for departments that don't table their departmental plans in a timely manner. I'm all for that. But I think a more realistic and feasible approach to ensure that you as parliamentarians can better hold the government to account would be fixed dates for budget or a fixed window that would be early enough in the year that main estimates would reflect budgetary expenditures, so budget initiatives, And also the departmental plans would reflect items, new items that are in the budget for them, so that you collectively would have a good sense when you study the main estimates of how that reconciles with the budget, because budget items would by and large be found in the mains, and departmental plans would also reflect the government's priorities as stated in the budget. But with a budget that is tabled in late March or anywhere in March really, or even April, it's not feasible for the departmental plans to reflect budget priorities, and it's not possible for the main estimates to paint an accurate picture of government spending. So that's why I've been suggesting for a while now that a budget date sometime in February, early in February preferably, would facilitate your job and would also ensure that what is in the mains makes sense to you and reflects what's in the budget.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll now go over to Mr. Baines for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our guests for joining us again today. I'm going to ask a little bit about the green economy. The U.S. are offering substantial incentives through investments in the green economy. Budget 2023 is reflecting similar measures to incentivize investment in Canada's emerging green economy. Do you believe these market-based incentives should ensure Canada remains competitive as the world shifts to a more climate-conscious economy?
That's a difficult question for me to answer, as whether Canada remains or becomes competitive or not depends on a variety of factors. The presence of an ecosystem to ensure that these businesses can thrive. Also, a competitive tax regime, inputs that are available at a reasonable price, as well as energy supply that allows these businesses to manufacture what will be needed for a greener economy. So, of course, subsidies and tax assistance will contribute to making Canada more competitive, but it is difficult for me to assess, like in a general manner, whether this will be sufficient, too much, or not enough. It requires a drill-down approach by sector and even by specific types of products. But for sure, the government assistance that was announced in the budget will certainly contribute to making Canada more competitive, as it reduces the overall cost for companies that want to establish in Canada to build these new machinery and equipment and new forms of energy.
Thank you. And significant source of funding in these main estimates is going towards new healthcare transfers. Do you believe that these funds should help alleviate some of the issues provincial healthcare systems are struggling with right now?
Well, with the amounts that have been announced and will be provided through the new health accord, I certainly hope that it will contribute to alleviate some of the pressures on the healthcare system, because we're talking about dozens and dozens of billions of dollars over a number of years. So I'd be very discouraged if it did absolutely nothing. So I'm very hopeful it will lead to improvement in the healthcare system, or at the very least, stabilization of these systems.
I know it was touched upon a little bit earlier, investment in public service training. Could public service training investments reduce overall costs in the long run?
I think it could, especially if the training is targeted to areas that are most in need when it comes to the provision of policy advice and government services. So, for example, if one thinks about training for the persons who work in call centers to better handle customer queries, that I think can only improve and enhance the customer experience or citizen experience or taxpayer experience. So I think that could, if it's well targeted and addresses needs that are documented, it could certainly help improve the quality of services, be it services to Canadians, but also services to ministers or parliamentarians.
Okay, and just last question, if I can get it in here. One of the challenges in that same area, as identified by Vice Admiral Topsy here, uh, in his experience, once department employees develop the necessary talents, they're soon identified and are often hired out into the private sector. Is there any amount of investment in the public service, or is there this part of new normal that pushes governments to continue using outside services?
It can be one factor, and it's quite common, I think, in areas such as IT services where the expertise is in very short supply. So providing training to government employees in these sectors risks making them even more attractive for the private sector. So that's certainly one big risk, and it explains why government services, or government departments rather, have to use outside consultants. I've discussed with a couple of deputy ministers in the government, and that's what they clearly told me, especially when it comes to IT. And that is one reason that explains the use of external consultants, because it's very difficult to find that expertise, even if the government wanted to hire employees with that expertise.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Baines. Mrs. Goosey, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Federal spending on elderly benefits has been increasing, and you project that by 2027, 2028, federal spending on elderly benefits will reach $93.8 billion. Can you tell us the primary reasons that these costs are rising and how federal spending is accommodating the increase?
So the main factors behind the increase in elderly benefits are three main factors. The first is the recent top-up of 10% for elderly benefits for those aged 75 and older. So that's a one-off. But the two main factors are demographic growth. So as Canada's population ages, there are more seniors, but not only are there more seniors, but they represent a larger share of the Canadian population. And the other main factor is inflation, because these benefits are fully indexed to inflation. So when there is inflation, these benefits increase. So they increase with population, they increase with the level of prices, and they also increase as a result of policy decisions, discretionary policy decisions. How these are accommodated within the federal budget, they're accommodated through increased government revenues. And so in the absence of savings elsewhere, they either increase the deficit or they crowd out other types of spending. But what we are seeing for the next couple of years is that these will grow at a relatively solid pace, but not on a pace that will make this unsustainable at the federal level.
Thank you. The Canada Health Transfer is expected to grow by $4.2 billion to a total of $49.4 billion in 2023-2024, and rising to above $60 billion in 2027-2028. Is this growth driven by the new federal-provincial agreement from 3% growth to 5% growth, or are there other factors that are impacting this amount?
The growth in the CHT going forward is impacted almost exclusively by the new agreement to increase the CHT by a minimum of 5%. In the absence of that enrichment, it would have grown by a smaller amount each year, as nominal GDP growth is expected to be lower than 5% in most years, except for 25-26, if I'm not mistaken, where nominal GDP growth is expected to be above 5% anyway. So that's a year in which the enrichment to the CHT would not have made a big difference, whether it happens or not.
Thank you. As well, the government earmarked $3 billion over 5 years to implement a new framework for long-term care standards. But you mentioned that this will not be adequate. So what do you think about this is not sufficient? And how do you think that the government will have to reprioritize to address these spending gaps?
So what we mean by that is that we did a report a few years ago, if I'm not mistaken, where we looked at how much it would cost to implement national standards when it comes to long-term care, notably the number of hours of care per day per person, as well as increasing the salaries and wages of those who work in long-term care. I think it was at the request of an NDP MP, and we found that the cost would be significantly higher than the $3 billion over 5 years that is mentioned in the budget, or the funding that has been earmarked for that specific initiative.
The federal debt to GDP ratio is projected to increase temporarily. What is driving this increase, please?
The federal debt to GDP ratio is increasing in the short term as a result of slower than expected GDP growth. So inflation, nominal GDP. So inflation is expected to slow down, but also government spending, notably the deficit, is expected to increase, which will put pressure on the debt to GDP ratio. So this is what is driving the increase in the debt to GDP ratio. Sorry.
By this government need to happen to successfully reduce the debt to GDP ratio, in your opinion?
If the government wanted to keep the debt to GDP ratio on a downward trend in each and every one of these years, it would need to either increase taxes this year and next, or decrease spending, or a combination of both, to ensure that the debt to GDP ratio maintains a downward trajectory in each and every one of the next 5 years.
The outlook for real GDP growth over 2023 to 2027 presented in Budget 2023 is slightly weaker compared to the MBO's March outlook. What is creating this weakness, please?
It's a difference in the growth. So the growth is expected to be slightly lower in the outer years because of the faster growth earlier in the period. So it's a displacement in growth.
And do you think there have been changes to Canada's economic outlook since your March report?
Nothing substantial, nothing fundamental. So our March report, our March outlook is still by and large valid in our opinion.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mrs. Kusi. Mr. Kusmirchuk, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Giroux and your team for, again, coming to OGGO and providing some excellent responses. Your report mentioned the significant, or highlighted the significant investments that are being made for seniors. $1 out of $6 in the budget is being spent on seniors, and rightfully so. That includes programs like OAS and GIS. There were 2.7 million more Canadians living in poverty under the Conservative government, 45,000 more seniors living in poverty under the Conservative government. I wanted to ask you, does the significant investment that the Liberal government is making in our seniors, in Canadians, through programs like OAS and GIS, is that having a positive impact on Canadians' well-being?
I haven't looked at the numbers of seniors living in poverty or below the low-income threshold, low-income cutoff, but I assume that the recent investments or enrichments to elderly benefits will have a positive impacts on the number of seniors living below the low-income cutoff. So when I say a positive impact, I mean lowering the number of seniors who live in poverty.
I'm going to take that as a yes. In the 2011 Conservative Party election platform, it unequivocally states, and I quote, "We will not cut transfer payments to individuals or to the provinces for essential things like healthcare, education, and pensions." And then less than 1 year later, they introduce cuts to the old age security, basically by increasing the age of eligibility from 65 to 67. And so I wanted to ask you, why would the Conservatives raise the age of eligibility for OAS from 65 to 67? What was the point of that? And furthermore, what impact would that have had on our seniors had the Liberal government not reversed it in the very first year that it came to office? What impact would it have on our seniors if the Conservative cuts to OAS would be allowed to continue?
So I can't speak to the intention of the government when it announced that in 2011. I can probably say that safely that there are two main reasons to do that. One reason can be to reduce the overall cost of the program. The other reason can be to provide further work incentives so that when the country is faced with labor shortages, it provides an incentive for older persons to remain in the workforce for a couple of more months or up to 2 more years. The impact this would have had on seniors is difficult to determine precisely, but it's quite clear that in the absence of old age security for an additional 2 years, there would be more seniors living in poverty. I should point out, however, that change was scheduled to be implemented very gradually over a number of years. So, but I don't remember exactly the timelines over which it was to be implemented.
As I understand it, those Conservative cuts to old age security would have taken place starting this year in 2023. Is that correct? So there would have been hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of seniors that would have been robbed of average annual payments of up to $7,000 per year. Is that correct? Had the Conservative policy been still in place?
I don't know how many exactly, because I think the intent was to implement that, as I said, gradually, advancing or postponing the age of retirement or eligibility to elderly benefits by 2 months per year or something like that. So it would have made a difference to probably thousands and thousands of seniors.
But you could agree that trying to save money on the backs of our seniors is not a good idea, as the Conservatives have put forward. Is that correct?
That's a policy decision, and I'll let you, among yourself, parliamentarians, debate what is a good idea and what is a bad idea when it comes to policy decisions.
Switch to some good news. This year is the year 2023 when the basic personal amount that was increased by the Liberal government in 19. It's the year that it's been fully implemented, this tax year in 2023. How many seniors will benefit from the fact that the basic personal amount has been increased to $15,000? What impact will this have on our seniors?
Well, it will certainly make more seniors tax-free. It will ensure that more seniors do not pay taxes, and those who still pay taxes will pay lower taxes by increasing the basic personal amount.
So this Liberal policy will put more money back in the pockets of Canadian seniors. Is that correct?
Mr. Kuzmierczuk. There'll be one more round. Mrs. Vinola, please.
Merci beaucoup,
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The 23-24 budget puts new measures in place that were unannounced that total about $800 million. No specific information has been given as to the final destination of these funds. It's quite vague. Is it normal to not have details on the final destination of these funds that will be used without being announced, or is that something new? It's not something usual, especially when there are very specific amounts that vary from 1 year to next. You talked about the net amount over a number of years, 5 years. So there are positive amounts in certain years that are quite precise, and negative amounts in other years, which means that the absolute value is about $12 billion over a 5-year period. So this is raising many questions. but providing no answers. We did ask these questions of the officials and did not receive any answers. They cannot give us those details without approval. But it's quite unusual. Yes, I was wondering if you received any answers. You have no answers. We haven't got any answers. Should be we worrying about $12 billion for which we have no answers? I don't want to make it seem that there's anything unhealthy or that's unduly hidden. It worries me for one reason, because when the government will be announcing the measures related to these sums, it will be very difficult to make a connection between the amounts mentioned in the budget and the initiatives that will be announced. So it will be difficult to know when those amounts will be revealed or used, or if it's a attribution of funds when it's negative amounts. So it's very difficult to link that to the amounts mentioned in budget 23-24. So the government increased the old age pension only for those who are 75 and older, leaving those between 65 and 75 years of age aside. So do you know how much it would cost to increase the pension of people from between 65 and 75 years of age? We did not calculate that amount, but the committee expressed its wish that I do that calculation. If that is the will of the committee, by means of a motion, we will be able to come back to you with a more detailed estimate of the cost of extending that to people 65 to 75 years of age. When one's living in poverty, when there's a lack of food, when we don't have money to get clothes or to get a decent roof or to repair the roof that we do have, et cetera, physical and psychological health suffer, which over the long term increases the costs on the health care system, on community organizations, et cetera. So by not increasing the pension of seniors between 65 and 75 years of age is the calculation of the direct and indirect impact on these seniors who cannot provide for themselves. Has this been calculated when they finally reach 75 years of age to get their 10%? To my knowledge, there has not been an analysis of the benefits, and I think that's what you're alluding to increase or not by 10% the payments for those between 65 and 75 years of age. Were the economic benefits calculated, the economic consequences of increasing the seniors' pension? So $1 extra in payments, what economical advantage? What's at the in terms of prevention, for example, on the middle term? Maybe that was already calculated, but not recently, not to my knowledge. I know it's not work that we've done, and I'm not aware whether or not it was done by the government when the 10% increase for 75 years and older was announced.
On that thread, actually, we saw the Conservatives want to raise the retirement age from 65 to 67. And now we see this government create a two-tiered OAS system where they are giving a 10% increase for those over 75, but those between 65 and 75 aren't getting it, despite the fact that we're in an inflation crisis. Do you see that as a policy that is designed to force seniors to continue to work in the workforce to be able to make ends meet?
That can be one of the intentions behind that. I'm not sure the extent to which that will be effective, because it's not something that I have personally studied. Neither have we looked at the incentive impact of a differential treatment for those aged 65 to 74 and 75 and above. But it's quite possible.
And that, like I said it earlier, it's about the same price as a 1% tax increase based on 2015 corporate tax, which is significantly risen, just to cover the increase from 75 and older. So a 1% corporate tax would cover that. Now, we saw the government announce that over 10 years, they're going to contribute $25 billion in healthcare transfers in 4 areas: rural health, healthcare workers, mental health, and modernizing the healthcare system and data. Have you seen any precedent, and I'm going back to the mental health discussion, in that we have some provinces, like my home province, with the new EB announcement, we're going to be about 9% of healthcare spending on mental health and related to substance use. Ontario is at 3%, a conservative government here. Have you seen any precedent in transfers on that healthcare transfer where there's money that has to be spent on a certain area, like mental health?
Yes, that was taking place years and years ago when the federal government was setting up trusts for specific areas, notably for the purchase of medical equipment. Way back when money was made available to provinces and territories for these specific purposes. I remember wait times, I remember medical equipment, and that was mostly end-of-year money that was provided to provinces through the establishment of trusts.
Do you find it difficult to calculate yourself? I mean, given this $25 billion that's going to be in 4 areas, it's not going to be very clear. It's pretty cryptic at best in terms of how much of that's going to end up going to mental health care.
I think it will be challenging to determine the portion of that will go to specific areas, including mental health, because when it comes to funding for health issues, it's very difficult to follow the money. Money is fungible in an area of need such as healthcare, where there are billions of dollars spent in every jurisdiction. So it will be very difficult to determine the proportion of these $25 billion going to mental health.
Now, the Treasury Board Secretariat plans to implement this year, the 2020-2024 National Action Plan on Open Government, and publish new data sets to the Open Government portal. It says, quote, including those that Canadians specifically request, end quote. Which data sets would you recommend adding to the Open Government portal? And I guess we heard during the McKinsey study, especially from Sean Boots, that public contract data is particularly lacking. What info and data sets need to be added to the Open Government portal to allow effective oversight of whether procurement regulations are being followed and evaluation of contract value for money? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, if you ask me what type of data should be made available on Open Government, we can be here for a long time. I would probably say it should be the opposite. What data should not be there? And I think there is a good case to be made for limiting the information that's publicly available to commercially sensitive cabinet confidences, solicitor-client privilege, but it should be open by default, and I think that would relieve a lot of the pressure that's put on access to information shops in the government, and it would simplify many people's lives. So what type of data? I think it should be the vast majority of data held by government departments and institutions.
I've asked you this before. The UN Rapporteur, Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, discussed privatization as a cause of poverty, even while privatization costs government more. We're seeing it here today. Do you have any comments on that, and how much money is going to commissions, to subbing out, and to profit for these big, large consulting companies?
Unfortunately, that is our 5 minutes. Maybe you can get back to us as you commonly do, Mr. Giroux, on that question. Mrs. Cusi for 5, and then Mrs. Thompson for 5.
Thank you, Chair. Monsieur Giroux, I'm wondering if you could tell the committee the amount of taxes, carbon tax specific collected for GST and HST, would you have that number with you? The revenue that is received from GST and HST, that is the carbon tax.
I can certainly get back to the committee with that information.
Thank you. You talked about open government. But you also stated in your issues for parliamentarians that you recommend that Parliament consider adopting a new legislative or administrative framework to improve transparency and comprehensibility for parliamentarians and the public. What are your primary concerns with the current policies?
My main concerns relate to the fact that as parliamentarians and for Canadians who have an interest in budget making, the main estimates are tabled before the budget, so the mains do not include any budgetary initiatives. Then, so the mains, you're asked as parliamentarians to review the mains and approve them. Then the budget comes along, new initiatives in the budget. They're not in the mains, so it's a bit confusing. Here we are on May 8. The budget was tabled at the end of March, but nowhere in the mains are budget items. So these will find their way into supplementary estimates A or B or maybe even C. So it makes it very difficult for parliamentarians to figure out where are the budget initiatives in these appropriation bills that you are asked to approve. So that's my main concern. And similarly, departmental plans do not include any of the budget initiatives. So you have these instruments, these pieces of information that don't include budget initiatives. So it's a bit confusing, to say the least, for anybody who's, even people who are very studious and try to make sense of all these documents, to really follow the money and follow it appropriately.
And why do you think the current framework exists if there are so many challenges in interpreting it?
Because it serves a couple of people very well. It gives the current timelines for tabling the budget, gives a lot of flexibility to the government and to the Minister of Finance to table a budget when they are ready and when it suits them. Whereas fixed tabling date for a budget or a shorter window, earlier window, would force the government to table its budget at a time that may not be convenient, or at a time when there are still lots of unknown when it comes to the specific decisions that the government has not yet made.
In the 2022 Fall Economic Statement, the government put aside $8.5 billion in additional spending over 2022-2023 to 2027-2028 for any anticipated near-term pressures. And I think you addressed this a little bit in one of my previous rounds. What pressures do you expect, or the government is expecting, to materialize in the near term?
I can't speak for the government because we asked that question. So what are these items for? And we were referred back to the explanation in the Fall Economic Statement. It could be a number of things. It could be pressures to spend more on healthcare. Maybe that was what they were referring to. It could also be additional spending on national defense issues. It could also be the assistance to Volkswagen, that they were in discussions with the company and they knew it was going to be somewhat expensive and they set aside some money. So it can be a number of things, but without having the details, it's very difficult to determine exactly what it was and whether some of these pressures have indeed materialized or have gone away.
The government plans to realign previously announced spending. Are the details of that reallocation included in the budget?
There were no details except for the 15% reduction in consulting services and travel. So there were no details, not yet, at least, in the budget. Not that I'm aware of. And we've asked that question, and we were not successful in getting more information than what was in the budget.
Pardon me.
That
Thank
is
you
our
very
time.
much. My
Thanks
apologies.
very
I thought
much.
I had time for one more. Thank you.
Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you. And if I could just go back a moment to back to the data piece around the federal spending on healthcare, and just to draw a link, the benefit of data that is able across the country, able to evaluate how, first of all, how funding is allocated. So for the first time, I understand we're going to be able to ensure that mental health funding, for example, it ends up in mental health services, primary health care, and so on and so forth to long-term care. So, and then also the evaluation around the impact to health or to health delivery. And we've also heard in this committee through the outsourcing study, the transformational work that is happening through many of those contracts around digitalizing government and the obvious reality of what that's going to mean for service delivery. What does that, data, the strong data metric, or that ability to do that analysis, what does that mean for your reports?
Is that we are better able to provide analysis and information to parliamentarians that is impartial and also nonpartisan. So that's the usefulness of that type of data. So it's essential.
I agree. I'm very much a data person. I want to just reference the automatic tax filing that was in the budget, and for me that was a real celebration. And again, back to my work with persons who really struggle to receive government supports because they had not filed income tax. Could you do you see the PBO bringing a report to government on the impact of that service for persons on benefits?
That is certainly something that we could look if there were a specific question or questions that the committee or another committee wanted us to look at when it comes to the benefits of auto-filing. But I think the CRA itself would be in a very good position to do that, as it can sometimes be a bit delicate for us to request and handle specific tax information. So I don't see any big reason why the CRA itself would not be more than happy to provide that type of information.
Thank you, and I certainly see that as the ability to link people to government supports who are otherwise not able to, the benefit to that in terms of cost savings, because obviously we know people enter the system in other more expensive ways, generally through emergency supports. I want to just link back to the Canada Health transfers. How will jurisdictions with older, less healthy populations, rural, remote areas, how will they fare compared with younger, more urban jurisdictions in terms of that, in terms of the transfers? And is there a precedence for transferring funds to provinces that's not just on a per capita basis?
So it's quite well known that younger populations are less demanding on the healthcare system, or to put it otherwise, they are costing less on the public healthcare system. And as we always, as we get older, we tend to cost more in healthcare services. So provinces or regions with an older population tend to have greater needs, public healthcare needs, and populations that are younger, urban populations that are younger, have different challenges, but generally speaking, tend to need less in terms of healthcare expenditures. But the Canada Health transfer is a per capita transfer that is equal, and it does not take into account the differences in demographics across provinces. So provinces receive the same amount per capita, be they older on average or younger, so it does not take into consideration the differences in the composition of populations.
On a very personal note, again, in my province, we introduced a health accord that really looks at health outcomes across the continuum of determinants of health. And I'm very hopeful that the data management piece is going to show the impact of housing, access to mental health services, transportation, et cetera, on health outcomes. So I'm excited about that. The last time you were here, you
That is
said...
our time.
Oh,
unless
sorry.
it's going to be, unless it'll be real brief.
No, I'll
Okay.
pass. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Colleagues, if you don't mind, I have a couple questions for the PBO, and then we'll wrap up. I just need some housekeeping items on some budget stuff. Mr. Giroux, thank you for bringing up the fixed budget dates. I recall it was a recommendation from two previous OGGO reports on the estimates, and something I'll continue to push for as well. So thanks for bringing that up. Just want to ask you quickly, Mrs. Kusi brought up the issue around inflation and housing. I'm wondering if the PBO has looked into the effects of the money laundering and the price of housing. If you've looked into that, or is that something that you could look into for us?
It's not something we have looked at because data would probably be quite difficult to obtain on money laundering. I'm not sure if there's a government agency that has solid data on money laundering. And if they do, I hope they do something against it. So it's something that might be doable, might be very difficult to do, depending on the quality of data that is available, if there's anything available at all.
Maybe that's something that you could do. Maybe you could get back to us if that's a doable thing for yourself. And then just quickly, with the, it looks like the government's settled with most of the public sector unions. There's been wildly, I'm not going to say inflated numbers, but there's been numbers on from one extreme to the other on the costs. Would you be able to provide to us what the cost will be from the changes? And then is there such a thing as like an all-in cost currently for the average FTE for the public service? If that's something you could doable to provide to us? Because I've seen some, again, wildly exaggerated claims on both sides. So I'm wondering if we could clear the air, so to speak, and get an actual number. Are we fine with that, having that reported to us, colleagues?
Yeah.
Wonderful. That is all I had, except to pass on my sincere thanks. OGGO, about a month ago, passed a motion requiring witnesses to get back to us within 3 weeks of all requests. You're the very first ones that we've had to put this thread across to, even though I know you were planning on doing that anyways. But I want to thank you sincerely for everything that you continue to do for us. I will dismiss the three of you, and then colleagues, just really quickly, we need to approve the budget for the estimates. That's the usual providing headsets, even though I don't think we'll need to. So the proposed budget's the amount of $1,500 for the study of the subject matter of the main estimates, 2023, 2024. If we can adopt that. Thank you, colleagues. And then we've got a request from the Auditor General she is doing a study on the McKinsey contracts. She's asked for her and her named staff access to the McKinsey docs that we have so far. So we need permission from us to grant her that access. I assume we do, otherwise it's going to cost a lot of money for her to re-access that stuff. Are we in agreement, colleagues? Yes. Wonderful. Wednesday, we've got 3 departments with us, PCO, Transportation Safety Board, and Defense Construction. Right now, we also have the secondary. We had 2 sets of meetings booked to bring in the various departments about the redacted documents. That's also set for Wednesday, so 4:30 to 6:30 and then 6:30 to 8:30. Although I'm hearing because of resources, there is a chance that the second part of 6:30 to 8:30 may not happen. I'll know, or we will know tomorrow. But I'm told there's a strong chance we may lose the second part, but I'll let everyone know tomorrow. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the update. I just want to make sure that we are on the record that the Liberal team has raised the concern around 2 back-to-back, and the fact that last Wednesday's meeting got canceled without any notice and without consultation. So, and we also noticed that this meeting for this Wednesday, also it's got kind of scheduled without any notice or consultation. I've communicated that to you. I just wanted to make sure that it's also on the record. Thank you.
Sure, it will be for these two meetings. It will be, I'll be honest, probably very last notice because it's very, very difficult to get the resources. For example, I think the clerk and I were discussing on Friday that we got resources for Friday night. Like, it's so last notice. So I do apologize, but these extra meetings will be last notice with a day or two's notice. We'll provide as much possible notice. I'm trying to get resources for next Tuesday, but I can't promise anything because it's given and then taken away. I understand. The comments we got back and have the blues was, we'll go ahead with meetings and leave it to us to try and figure out a time. Is there a real opposition to having back-to-back? We chose a back-to-back because that's just the only time we had available. If that's not a preference, we'll try not to, but right now we're just basing it, trying not to do Friday evening, but we're also trying we'll take what's given to us.
Yeah, thank you. Having consulted with the team on the Liberal side, there is definitely a preference not to have it back to back. Thank you, sir.
We will take that. Mr. Johns?
There is definitely a preference not to have it Friday night from our side. Yeah, a lot of us have already events planned in our communities and ridings.
So Mr. Johns is proposing Saturday morning, it appears. No, we're trying not to do it Friday night because I understand, and even Thursday night, because we recognize, especially Mr. Johns and other people, Ms. Thompson, I'm sure, is one difficult travel times. But it's getting, I don't want to say imposed upon us. We're getting not scraps, but there's so little resources. This is what it's available. And then at the same time, the poor clerk has to run out and try and find the 9 departments to agree. So a lot is out of our control, but I will take what I'm hearing and we'll try and work around as best we can. If there's nothing else, colleagues, we are adjourned.